The financial collapse of women has arrived. For decades, women have relied on men to subsidize their lifestyles through dating, marriage, and casual support. But that era has ended abruptly as men choose solitude and self focus over endless provision. This shift exposes a harsh truth that millions are now confronting in real time, from skyrocketing bills to empty pantries, and it signals a profound societal transformation that no one can ignore. Join me as we explore the depths of this crisis, the warnings that went unheeded, and the irreversible consequences unfolding right now. Because by the end, you will understand exactly why this winter for women is just beginning and how it could last for generations. Let us delve into the roots of this monumental change, tracing back to a time when societal norms positioned men as the primary providers and women as beneficiaries of that structure, a dynamic that persisted even as cultural shifts promised equality but delivered something far different. In the post war decades, as economies boomed and opportunities expanded, women entered the workforce in greater numbers, championed by movements that emphasized independence and career pursuits over traditional family roles. Yet beneath this veneer of progress lay a subtle dependency that few acknowledged openly. Men continued to shoulder the burden of financial support, not just in marriages, but through informal channels like dates, where meals were covered, gifts were given freely, and assistance flowed without question, creating an ecosystem where many women could maintain appearances of self sufficiency while leaning heavily on male contributions. This was no accident. It evolved from a combination of chivalric expectations and economic realities, where men's higher average earnings and willingness to provide filled the gaps left by unequal pay structures and the rising costs of modern living. However, as inflation crept up and job markets became more competitive, this arrangement began to strain, with men increasingly questioning the fairness of a system that demanded their resources while offering little in return beyond fleeting companionship. The turning point came with voices like that of Kevin Samuels, a figure who rose to prominence by delivering unvarnished truths about relationships and finances, repeatedly cautioning women that their choices would lead to inevitable hardship if not reconsidered. He painted vivid pictures of a future where entitlement would clash with reality, where the pursuit of unfettered freedom would result in isolation and poverty, and where the dismissal of men as partners would leave women vulnerable to economic storms they were ill prepared to weather alone. Samuels emphasized that winter was approaching, a metaphor for the cold, unrelenting period of struggle that would strip away illusions of perpetual summer, forcing a reckoning with the consequences of decades of unbalanced dynamics. His messages resonated with men who felt undervalued and exploited, inspiring a quiet revolution where individuals began prioritizing their own well being, savings, and peace over the chaos of modern dating. As men withdrew, the impact rippled outward, revealing how deeply intertwined women's financial stability had been with male participation in the relationship economy. Today, we see the evidence everywhere, from social media posts where women lament their inability to cover basic expenses to broader economic indicators showing disproportionate job losses among female dominated sectors amid technological advancements like AI automation. This is not merely a temporary dip, but a structural collapse, one that exposes the fragility of lifestyles built on borrowed support rather than solid foundations. Consider the mechanics of this dependency. For years, dating served as an unofficial subsidy program, with studies indicating that a significant portion of women engaged in outings primarily for the complementary experiences rather than genuine interest, a practice that sustained their budgets but eroded trust over time. When men recognized this pattern and opted out, the void became immediate and profound, leaving women to confront rent payments, utility bills, and grocery costs without the buffer they had come to expect. Inflation exacerbates this, driving up the price of essentials while wages in many fields stagnate, particularly those traditionally occupied by women, such as retail, hospitality, and administrative roles, now threatened by efficiency driven layoffs. Moreover, the emphasis on maintaining beauty standards adds another layer of financial pressure, with expenditures on cosmetics, clothing, and grooming often rivaling or exceeding food budgets, trapping individuals in a cycle of spending that prioritizes appearance over sustainability. As age advances and opportunities narrow, this trap tightens, with older women finding themselves especially at risk of slipping into poverty without the safety net of a partner's income. The global dimension adds urgency, as similar patterns emerge from America to China, where women voice their struggles on platforms, admitting that survival feels impossible without male assistance, a chorus that grows louder as economic downturns deepen. Men, in contrast, have adapted by embracing minimalism, focusing on personal growth, and redirecting resources toward their own futures, creating lives of relative comfort that stand in stark opposition to the desperation unfolding elsewhere. This divergence is not born of malice, but of self preservation, a response to years of being labeled toxic for merely existing or approaching with interest, prompting a collective decision to step back and observe from afar. The result is a societal shift where indifference replaces obligation, and women must navigate a world that no longer bends to accommodate unearned expectations. Kevin Samuels's prophecies now manifest in headlines and personal stories shared online, where pleas for help go unanswered, and the once vibrant simp economy, fueled by men eager to please, has dwindled to interactions confined to paid digital platforms yielding meager returns. On these sites, the average participant earns far less than a living wage, often netting just over $100 monthly after fees, a pittance that underscores the unsustainability of such alternatives. Governments, burdened by their own fiscal woes, offer no bailout, leaving women to face the beds they have made, as Samuel so aptly phrased it. This is the essence of the great humiliation he foretold, a prolonged descent from perceived privilege to harsh reality, one that will span decades before equilibrium is restored. Yet, amid this turmoil, opportunities for reflection emerge, urging a reevaluation of priorities and relationships in a way that fosters mutual respect rather than one sided extraction. As we examine the progression of this crisis, it becomes clear that the seeds were sown long before the current economic pressures intensified, rooted in a cultural narrative that glorified individualism at the expense of interdependence, leading to a generation ill equipped for solitary survival. In the 1970s and 1980s, as feminist ideals gained traction, women were encouraged to pursue careers and delay family formation, a strategy that yielded professional advancements for some, but masked underlying vulnerabilities for many others. This era saw the rise of the girl boss mentality, where success was measured by corporate achievements and financial autonomy. Yet statistics reveal that even high earning women often relied on supplemental support from partners to maintain their standards of living. The delusion, as Samuels described it, lay in believing that this autonomy was absolute, ignoring the systemic advantages men provided through direct and indirect means. When men began to awaken to this imbalance, influenced by online communities and real world experiences of rejection and shaming, they chose to redirect their energy inward, cultivating hobbies, skills, and financial security that insulated them from relational demands. This movement, often termed men going their own way, represents not a rejection of women per se, but a reclamation of personal agency, allowing individuals to thrive without the constant drain of unreciprocated efforts. The fallout for women has been swift and severe, with reports surfacing of increased reliance on food banks, shelters, and emergency aid as bills accumulate and savings deplete. Inflation, running at levels not seen in decades, amplifies every expense, from housing to transportation, making it nearly impossible for single income households to stay afloat without external help. Job losses, particularly in sectors hit hard by automation and economic slowdowns, disproportionately affect women who hold a majority of positions in vulnerable industries, leading to a surge in unemployment claims and underemployment. The beauty trap further compounds this as societal pressures demand ongoing investments in appearance to remain competitive in dating and professional spheres, diverting funds from essentials and perpetuating a cycle of debt. Across continents, the narrative echoes. In China, women post about the challenges of urban living without familial or spousal support. In Europe, similar complaints arise amid rising energy costs. And in America, the epicenter of this shift, the cries grow desperate as winter sets in. Men observe this from positions of stability, having simplified their lives to focus on essentials, enjoying the luxury of solitude without the weight of others' expectations. Samuels warned of mass poverty and destitution, predicting slums filled with those who once shamed traditional paths. And now, those visions materialize as homelessness rates climb among single women. The indifference from men is perhaps the most striking element, a deliberate choice born from years of being told to leave, to not approach, to redefine masculinity on terms that suited others. Now, as women attempt to reverse course, demanding pre and post date compensations under the guise of preparation costs, the absurdity highlights their predicament, but men remain unmoved, having found fulfillment elsewhere. Platforms like OnlyFans, once seen as empowering, now expose the myth of easy income, with most creators struggling to break even after platform cuts, forcing many back to square one. The state's role, long positioned as a substitute for male provision, falters under budget constraints, offering meager assistance that fails to bridge the gap. This leaves women in a precarious position, rushing toward Plan B only to find doors closed, a reality that Samuel celebrated as justice served. The humiliation unfolds gradually, a fall from grace that strips away layers of entitlement, revealing the core truth that survival often requires cooperation rather than conquest. In this new landscape, adaptation becomes key, yet the window narrows as time passes and options dwindle. Building on this foundation, let us consider the broader implications for society as this divide widens, reshaping not just individual lives, but the fabric of communities and economies in ways that demand attention and analysis. The relationship economy, once a silent pillar of financial flow, has crumbled, depriving women of the subsidies that masked deeper inequalities and allowed for lifestyles beyond their means. This economy encompassed everything from casual dinners to long term cohabitations, where men's contributions, often unspoken, covered deficits in rent, utilities, and leisure, creating an illusion of parity that crumbled when participation waned. With men opting for peace and isolation, the void exposes systemic flaws, such as wage gaps that persist despite decades of advocacy, and cost of living increases that outpace income growth in female led households. Rhetorically, one might ask what happens when the providers step aside. The answer lies in the rising tide of desperation visible on social media, where posts detail struggles with basic needs, pleas for understanding, and condemnations of men's withdrawal. These narratives, while poignant, underscore the warnings Samuels issued, highlighting how choices like prioritizing careers over family led to delayed milestones and reduced support networks. As AI expands, displacing jobs in administrative and service fields, women bear the brunt, with unemployment figures reflecting this disparity and pushing more toward precarious gig work or online ventures with low yields. The cosmetics conundrum adds irony, as expenditures on beauty products, essential for maintaining attractiveness in a competitive market, drain resources needed for survival, creating a self perpetuating loop of poverty. Globally, the pattern repeats, with women in developing nations facing amplified challenges due to cultural expectations and limited opportunities, while in wealthier countries, the fall feels more acute from higher purchase. Men, by contrast, thrive in simplicity, investing in themselves and enjoying freedoms unencumbered by relational obligations, a lifestyle that Samuels advocated as the path to true contentment. The great indifference manifests in empty inboxes, declined invitations, and a cultural shift towards self reliance, leaving women to confront the cold without rescue. Predictions of homelessness and reliance on public services now come true, with shelters reporting increased intake and food lines lengthening as winter deepens. The concept of predate money, a recent demand, reveals the extent of the panic, an attempt to extract resources under new pretexts, but it falls on deaf ears as men guard their earnings. OnlyFans statistics paint a grim picture, with average earnings barely covering basics after deductions, debunking myths of empowerment through such means. Governments saddled with debt provide no lifeline, forcing a return to fundamentals that many resisted. Samuel's legacy smiles upon this, a vindication of his foresight in an age of reckoning. The humiliation's duration promises decades of adjustment, a slow thaw after a brutal freeze, urging all to ponder the value of balanced partnerships over divisive ideologies. Shifting our focus to the psychological dimensions, the crisis reveals layers of delusion that sustained the old order, now peeled back to expose raw vulnerabilities and the need for honest self assessment in the face of adversity. For years, the narrative of empowerment encouraged women to dismiss traditional roles, shaming those who chose family over ambition. Yet this led to a demographic where singlehood dominates and financial independence proves elusive for most. Samuels dissected this delusion, pointing out how entitlement bred complacency, assuming men's support would always endure despite mistreatment and marginalization. When men heeded the calls to depart, finding solace in solitude, the psychological toll on women emerged, manifesting as anxiety over futures once taken for granted. Economic hardship amplifies this, with inflation eroding purchasing power and job scarcity breeding insecurity, particularly in sectors where women predominate. The beauty maintenance cycle, a psychological crutch for self worth, diverts funds from savings, perpetuating stress and debt in a vicious spiral. Internationally, the story varies but converges on themes of regret, with women expressing nostalgia for eras of clearer roles amid modern chaos. Men's adaptation, marked by contentment and focus, contrasts sharply, illustrating the mental benefits of detachment from unbalanced dynamics. Indifference from society at large compounds the isolation as former simps redirect attentions elsewhere to overseas options or digital escapism. The rise in demands for financial precompensation highlights desperation's edge, a tactic born from fear rather than equity. Low earnings from alternative platforms underscore the myth of quick fixes, leaving many stranded. State intervention's absence forces confrontation with reality, a bed of their making, as Samuels phrased. His triumph resonates in this era, a celestial nod to truth's victory. The humiliation's arc spans generations, a lesson in humility forged in hardship's fire. Exploring the economic mechanics further, we see how the withdrawal of male subsidies has triggered a domino effect across personal and macro levels, illuminating the interconnectedness of gender dynamics and financial stability in contemporary society. The dating subsidy, a multi-billion-dollar informal economy, evaporated as men recalibrated priorities, leaving gaps in budgets that once relied on free outings and gifts to stretch dollars. Inflation's relentless climb, coupled with stagnant wages, hits hardest those without dual incomes, pushing women toward thresholds of poverty previously buffered by relationships. AI driven disruptions target female heavy industries, accelerating layoffs and underemployment, while beauty expenses consume disproportionate shares of income, prioritizing facade over function. Global parallels abound, from American urban struggles to Asian economic pressures, where women voice identical laments. Men's simple luxuries, modest living with surplus, highlight the contrast, a testament to efficient resource allocation. Samuel's winter metaphor captures the chill, with destitution looming as shelters fill and aid systems strain. Indifference seals the fate as men embrace peace unperturbed. Absurd demands for monetary compensations reveal the depths but yield nothing. Platform earnings disappoint, a far cry from sustainability. Governmental shortfalls leave voids unfilled, enforcing accountability. Hey guys, in a world pushing you to own nothing and be happy, crypto is your key to survival. Join Angry's Crypto Academy to master buying, selling, and trading crypto. Make huge profits and safeguard your wealth. Plus, discover the one crypto virtually no one is talking about, poised to create new millionaires in the upcoming bull run. The link is in the description of the video below. Go check it out now. Samuel's warnings proven, the fall continues unabated. As the narrative unfolds, the societal ripple effects become evident, altering demographics, labor markets, and cultural norms in ways that will define the coming decades with lasting impact. Birth rates decline as partnerships dissolve, straining social systems designed for family units, while workforce participation shifts with men dominating resilient sectors. Women's entrapment in beauty spending mirrors broader consumer traps, diverting capital from productive investments. International variations emphasize universality, with women everywhere grappling with similar realizations. Men's solitude yields innovation and stability, a model of resilience. Samuel's foresight warns of prolonged struggle, with poverty's rise inevitable. Indifference grows, a barrier to reconciliation. Desperate tactics fail, exposing weaknesses. Low yield alternatives collapse myths. State inaction forces adaptation. Vindication for prophets like Samuel's endures. Humiliation's depth ensures transformation. Continuing from where the economic and psychological layers have been laid bare, the trajectory of this collapse points toward a fundamental reconfiguration of power dynamics that will redefine gender relations for the foreseeable future, one where assumptions of automatic support vanish entirely, and individuals must build their own safeguards against uncertainty. The erosion of the traditional provider role has not occurred in isolation, but as part of a larger cultural evolution that prioritizes personal sovereignty over collective obligation, a shift that men embraced earlier and more decisively than anticipated. This evolution manifests in everyday choices, from men declining to initiate contact to redirecting disposable income toward investments, travel, and self improvement rather than relational expenditures. The absence of these funds in women's budgets creates immediate shortfalls that compound over months and years, turning manageable difficulties into crises that spiral downward. Housing costs, already a dominant portion of income for many, become insurmountable without dual contributions, leading to delayed rent payments, evictions, and the painful process of seeking temporary accommodations with friends or family who may themselves be stretched thin. Utility shutoffs follow, then transportation limitations as fuel and maintenance expenses mount, restricting access to employment opportunities and further entrenching disadvantage. Grocery budgets shrink to the barest essentials, often supplemented by community pantries or discount programs that once served as occasional aid but now represent primary sources of nutrition. This descent is not dramatic in its onset, but gradual and relentless, a slow tightening that erodes dignity along with financial security. The cultural emphasis on independence, once celebrated as liberation, now reveals its double edged nature, granting freedom from certain constraints while imposing new ones in the form of solitary responsibility for every expense. Women who once navigated life with a network of male allies now face the stark reality that those allies have chosen different paths, leaving gaps that no amount of individual effort can immediately fill in an economy structured around rising costs and uneven opportunity distribution. The warnings issued years ago about preparing for self reliance ring truer with each passing season, as the consequences of dismissing them become impossible to ignore. Adaptation requires not just financial adjustments, but a complete rethinking of priorities, from reevaluating spending habits to reconsidering long term goals that previously assumed partnership support. Yet the pace of change outstrips the ability to adjust for many, particularly those who entered adulthood during periods of relative abundance and never developed the habits of frugality necessary in leaner times. This mismatch between expectation and reality fuels the visible distress expressed across digital spaces, where admissions of struggle mix with frustration directed at the very group once relied upon for relief. The response from men remains consistent, a quiet resolve to maintain boundaries established through hard won experience, boundaries that protect against patterns of extraction that characterized much of modern interaction. This resolve strengthens as stories circulate of continued demands without corresponding value offered, reinforcing the decision to remain detached. The broader economy, meanwhile, continues its transformation under pressures of technological displacement and monetary policy effects, with sectors once dominated by women bearing the heaviest burden of restructuring. Administrative positions vanish as software automates routine tasks, retail outlets consolidate or shift online, and hospitality roles fluctuate with consumer spending patterns altered by higher prices. These changes do not discriminate by intent, but by structure. Yet the outcome disproportionately impacts one gender, accelerating the slide into instability. In response, some women turn to entrepreneurial ventures or side hustles, yet the saturation of such markets and the low barriers to entry mean returns rarely match the effort invested, particularly when competing against established players or algorithmic platforms that favor visibility over merit. The illusion of easy supplemental income fades quickly, replaced by the grind of multiple low paying gigs that exhaust without adequately compensating. Meanwhile, the pursuit of credentials or advanced education, often presented as the path to security, carries mounting debt loads that further strain budgets already under pressure. The cumulative effect is a narrowing of horizons, where choices once abundant become limited to survival strategies rather than aspirational pursuits. This contraction of possibility stands in contrast to the expansion many men experience as they shed relational overhead and redirect focus toward mastery of skills, accumulation of assets, and cultivation of meaningful pursuits unburdened by external demands. The divergence creates two parallel realities, one of contraction and one of measured expansion, separated by the simple act of withdrawal from an imbalanced exchange. Kevin Samuels articulated this divergence repeatedly, framing it as the natural outcome of choices made over decades, choices that prioritized short term gains over long term stability. His analysis proved prescient because it rested on observable patterns rather than wishful thinking. Patterns now playing out in statistics on household formation, poverty rates among single adults, and shifts in consumer behavior. The data tells a story of widening gaps, where female headed households face higher risks of material hardship, while male headed ones increasingly report financial comfort through disciplined living. This is not a judgment, but an observation of cause and effect, where the removal of one variable alters the equation dramatically. Society at large begins to notice the imbalance, though responses vary from sympathy to skepticism, with some viewing the struggle as self inflicted and others as symptomatic of larger systemic failures. Regardless of perspective, the outcome remains unchanged: a prolonged period of adjustment where previous advantages evaporate and new foundations must be laid from scratch. The process demands resilience, resourcefulness, and a willingness to confront uncomfortable truths about dependency and entitlement, qualities that prove scarce when habits formed in more favorable conditions persist. The winter metaphor captures the season of scarcity perfectly, a time when preparation determines survival and neglect exacts its price. Those who heeded earlier calls to build independent capacity fare better, while those who dismiss them face the full force of exposure. The lesson embedded in this reality extends beyond gender to anyone relying on external support without contingency plans. A universal caution about the fragility of arrangements built on assumptions rather than certainties. Turning attention to the demographic consequences, the collapse accelerates trends already underway, reshaping population structures and social institutions in profound and lasting ways that will influence policy, culture, and daily life for generations. Declining partnership rates lead to fewer marriages and fewer children born within stable units, contributing to aging populations and shrinking workforces that strain pension systems and healthcare infrastructure designed around different assumptions. Singlehood becomes the norm rather than the exception for many women entering midlife, a status that carries different implications depending on financial footing, but universally reduces the buffer against economic shocks. Without shared households, fixed costs multiply, duplicating expenses for housing, utilities, and insurance that once divided neatly between partners. This multiplication effect compounds over time, turning modest incomes into insufficient ones and pushing more individuals toward public assistance programs already stretched thin. Birth rates continue their downward trajectory, not solely due to economic factors, but amplified by them, as the prospect of raising children alone in precarious conditions deters family formation. The resulting demographic shift places greater pressure on younger cohorts to support expanding elderly populations, creating intergenerational tensions that further complicate social cohesion. Cultural narratives evolve in response, with traditional family models regaining appeal among those witnessing the limitations of prolonged independence, though the practical barriers to forming such models remain high amid distrust and mismatched expectations. Men, having internalized the risks of entanglement, approach potential partnerships with greater caution, demanding clearer reciprocity and mutual contribution from the outset. This heightened selectivity narrows the pool of viable options for women seeking to re enter relational structures, creating a feedback loop where fewer connections form and isolation deepens. The cycle reinforces itself as visible struggles deter investment from potential supporters, while the absence of support intensifies struggles. Breaking the cycle requires fundamental changes in behavior and mindset. shifts that prove difficult when patterns have solidified over years. Yet, necessity drives adaptation in some cases, with women reevaluating priorities, reducing discretionary spending, and seeking communities that offer practical rather than symbolic support. These adaptations, while promising for individuals, occur against a backdrop of systemic challenges that limit upward mobility for many. Educational debt, stagnant wages in feminized professions, and the ongoing impact of automation create headwinds that no amount of personal effort fully overcomes without structural reform. In the absence of such reform, the path forward narrows to incremental survival rather than robust prosperity. Men's parallel trajectory, marked by deliberate simplicity and strategic accumulation, demonstrates an alternative model that prioritizes long term security over immediate gratification. This model gains adherence as its benefits become apparent, spreading through networks and influencing younger generations to adopt similar principles early. The contrast between the two paths sharpens public discourse, forcing examination of assumptions about gender roles, economic justice, and personal responsibility. Conversations once avoided now surface openly, challenging narratives that frame certain dynamics as inherently fair or progressive. The reckoning extends to institutions, from media to academia, that promoted ideals disconnected from emerging realities, prompting reevaluation of messaging and priorities. Yet change occurs slowly as entrenched interests resist shifts that threaten established positions. In the interim, individuals navigate the terrain as best they can, with outcomes determined largely by foresight, discipline, and adaptability. The winter season tests these qualities rigorously, separating those prepared from those caught unaware. Samuel's position as a foreteller gained stature in retrospect, his voice carrying weight because events aligned so closely with his predictions. The vindication serves not as celebration, but as sober confirmation that ignoring patterns invites consequences. Society moves forward carrying this lesson, one that reshapes expectations around relationships, finances, and self reliance in enduring ways. Delving deeper into the mechanisms of adaptation, we observe varied strategies emerging among women confronting the new landscape, strategies that range from pragmatic restructuring to desperate measures born of immediate pressure. Some embrace minimalism, downsizing living spaces, eliminating non essential subscriptions, and adopting frugal habits that stretch limited resources further than before. This approach yields measurable relief, allowing coverage of basics while rebuilding emergency funds, depleted during easier times. Others pursue skill development in fields less vulnerable to displacement, transitioning toward roles that demand human judgment, creativity, or physical presence that technology cannot easily replicate. These transitions demand time and often financial investment upfront, creating short term strain for potential long term gain. A portion turns toward communal living arrangements, sharing costs with compatible individuals to reduce individual burdens and provide mutual support networks that replace diminished familial or relational ones. These arrangements succeed when trust and compatibility exist, but falter when conflicts arise, highlighting the challenges of substituting informal alliances for structured partnerships. Entrepreneurial efforts proliferate, with women launching small businesses, freelance services, or content creation ventures aimed at carving out independent income streams. Success varies widely, depending on market demand, marketing acumen, and persistence through inevitable setbacks. The digital space offers opportunities, but also intense competition and platform dependency that introduces its own vulnerabilities. Meanwhile, A segment continues seeking external provision through evolving tactics, adapting demands to current conditions while encountering the same resistance that prompted initial withdrawal. These efforts yield diminishing returns as awareness spreads and boundaries harden. The diversity of responses illustrates the complexity of the situation, where no single solution fits all circumstances and outcomes depend heavily on starting position, resources, and willingness to change course. Men observe these developments from positions of relative stability, continuing to refine their own approaches while maintaining distance from entanglements that previously proved costly. Their consistency reinforces the new normal, where participation requires clear value exchange rather than default assumption. This requirement reshapes interaction fundamentally, demanding transparency and reciprocity that many find difficult to establish after years of different patterns. The resulting stalemate prolongs the separation, extending the period of adjustment and deepening the lessons embedded in the experience. Over time, these lessons permeate broader culture, influencing younger generations who witness the outcomes and adjust expectations accordingly. The transmission occurs through observation, conversation, and media reflection, gradually shifting norms toward greater caution and self sufficiency. The process unfolds unevenly, with some regions and communities adapting faster than others based on local economic conditions and cultural foundations. Yet the direction remains consistent toward societies where individuals bear primary responsibility for their security rather than relying on gendered assumptions of provision. This shift carries both costs and benefits, reducing certain dependencies while increasing others related to personal discipline and foresight. Navigating the transition requires honesty about trade offs, acknowledging that freedom from obligation comes paired with full accountability for outcomes. The winter season enforces this accounting rigorously, leaving little room for evasion. Those who meet the challenge emerge stronger, while those who resist prolong their discomfort. The arc of this transformation stretches across years, shaping not just individual destinies, but the collective future in ways that will be studied and debated long after the initial shock has passed. Examining the long term societal restructuring that emerges from this financial realignment reveals a gradual but unmistakable pivot toward economies and communities built around individual accountability rather than assumed interdependence between genders. The decline in marriage rates and cohabitation accelerates as both sides recalibrate expectations, with men increasingly viewing long term commitments through the lens of risk assessment rather than romantic idealism. This cautious approach stems from accumulated experiences where contributions flowed disproportionately in one direction, while appreciation or reciprocity remained inconsistent. As a result, fewer men enter formal partnerships without ironclad assurances of mutual benefit, leading to a contraction in the traditional family formation pipeline. Households shrink in size on average, with single person dwellings becoming more common across age groups, particularly among those in their 30s and 40s who once formed the core of dual income stability. This shift places greater demand on housing markets tailored to smaller units, driving up prices for studio and one bedroom apartments, while larger family homes sit longer on the market. Property developers respond by adjusting construction plans, favoring compact, efficient designs over sprawling suburban builds that presuppose multiple occupants sharing costs. Urban planning adapts accordingly, with cities investing in public transportation and walkable neighborhoods to accommodate populations less reliant on family vehicles or shared commuting expenses. The ripple extends to consumer markets where products once marketed towards couples or families see declining sales, while items designed for solitary living gain traction. Meal kits, for one, compact appliances, and subscription services emphasizing personal convenience, proliferate, reflecting a broader cultural embrace of streamlined, self contained lifestyles. Retail chains that thrived on bulk purchases for households pivot toward premium single serve options or experience based offerings that appeal to individuals prioritizing quality over quantity. Financial institutions notice the change as well, with mortgage applications from single applicants rising steadily and joint applications falling, prompting lenders to refine credit models that account for solo borrowers' repayment patterns. Insurance products evolve to address the realities of unpartnered life, offering tailored coverage for health, property, and income protection without built in assumptions of spousal support during crises. These adjustments, while incremental, compound over time to create an infrastructure that normalizes and supports independent living rather than penalizing it through higher relative costs. Communities reorganize around these new realities, with social groups forming based on shared interests, professional networks, or geographic proximity rather than familial ties. Neighborhood associations focus more on individual safety and resource sharing than on family oriented events. And volunteer organizations shift emphasis toward supporting aging singles rather than child centric programs. Religious institutions, once centered on marriage and procreation, adapt sermons and activities to address the spiritual needs of the never married or long term single, acknowledging that traditional pathways no longer represent the majority experience for many congregants. Education systems begin incorporating financial literacy curricula earlier and more comprehensively, emphasizing budgeting for solo scenarios, emergency fund building, and the risk of lifestyle inflation in the absence of shared burdens. Career counseling services highlight the advantages of versatile skill sets that withstand economic turbulence, advising students to prioritize fields with consistent demand and resistance to automation over those tied to volatile sectors. The cumulative effect reshapes generational expectations, with younger cohorts entering adulthood already attuned to the necessity of self sufficiency and the potential fragility of relational safety nets. Parents witnessing the struggles of their daughters or the deliberate detachment of their sons adjust guidance accordingly, stressing personal financial discipline alongside emotional intelligence. This transmission of caution influences dating behaviors from an early age, with teenagers and young adults approaching interactions with greater discernment and less willingness to tolerate unbalanced dynamics. The cultural conversation shifts from celebrating independence as an unqualified good to examining its practical limits, fostering more nuanced discussions about when collaboration enhances life and when it merely masks underlying imbalances. Media representations evolve to reflect these complexities, with stories exploring the triumphs of disciplined solitude alongside the challenges of unexpected isolation. Documentaries and long form journalism delve into the statistics behind household poverty rates, interviewing those navigating the transition and those who anticipated it, providing platforms for diverse perspectives without descending into sensationalism. Public policy debates intensify around measures to address the fallout, from expanded access to affordable housing to workforce retraining programs targeted at displaced workers in vulnerable industries. Proposals for universal basic income gain renewed attention as a potential buffer against structural shifts, though implementation faces resistance over funding and incentive concerns. Tax structures come under scrutiny for their treatment of single versus joint filers, with advocates pushing for adjustments that reduce penalties on unpartnered individuals. Healthcare policy grapples with the higher costs associated with solo coverage, seeking ways to lower premiums without compromising quality. These discussions, often contentious, signal a broader recognition that the old models no longer suffice and that new frameworks must account for demographic realities rather than nostalgic ideals. The process of adaptation unfolds unevenly across regions and socioeconomic strata, with wealthier areas able to absorb shocks through private resources while lower income communities face more acute pressures. Yet, even in affluent circles, the absence of assumed support prompts reevaluation of spending patterns and legacy planning, with greater emphasis on personal estates and long term care insurance. Philanthropic efforts redirect toward initiatives supporting single adults in crisis, funding shelters, job placement services, and financial counseling tailored to women experiencing sudden downward mobility. Nonprofit organizations expand outreach, offering workshops on debt management, career pivots, and emotional resilience in the face of economic uncertainty. These resources, while valuable, cannot fully replace the scale of support once provided informally through relationships, underscoring the magnitude of the change. The winter season persists because the underlying drivers show no immediate signs of reversal. Technological displacement continues apace, inflation pressures linger, and cultural attitudes toward provision remain guarded. Men maintain their course, finding validation in the stability they have constructed and little incentive to revert to previous patterns. Women, confronted with the sustained reality of reduced options, gradually segment into those who successfully adapt through disciplined change and those who struggle against persistent headwinds. The segmentation becomes visible in data on wealth accumulation, home ownership rates, and retirement preparedness, with clear divergences emerging along lines of foresight and action taken years earlier. This divergence fuels further introspection, prompting questions about how societies can foster environments where independence coexists with opportunity rather than devolving into isolation and hardship. The answers lie in a combination of personal responsibility, institutional reform, and cultural recalibration, none of which occur overnight. The timeline stretches across decades, allowing each cohort to learn from the preceding one and adjust trajectories accordingly. Samuel's vision of a prolonged reckoning holds firm, not as punishment, but as consequence, a natural outcome of choices compounded over time. His emphasis on preparation resonates more powerfully now, serving as a reference point for those seeking to navigate the terrain ahead. The narrative of collapse gives way to one of transformation, where hardship forces innovation and clarity emerges from necessity. Societies emerge leaner, more pragmatic, and potentially more equitable in their recognition that support must be earned rather than extracted. The path forward demands honesty about trade offs, acceptance of limits, and commitment to building from solid individual foundations rather than borrowed stability. This foundation, once established, offers resilience that no external subsidy can match, a lesson carved deeply into the experience of an entire generation. Advancing further into the implications for global migration and cross cultural dynamics, the financial pressures within Western societies begin influencing patterns of movement and international relationships in subtle yet significant ways. As domestic opportunities contract for many women, particularly in urban centers where living costs outpace earnings. Some explore relocation to regions with lower expenses or stronger traditional support structures. Countries in Eastern Europe, Southeast Asia, and parts of Latin America attract attention for their combination of affordability and cultural emphasis on family networks, offering environments where communal living reduces individual financial strain. This migration flow, though smaller than historical waves, grows steadily as digital nomad visas and remote work options make relocation feasible without complete career disruption. Simultaneously, men from wealthier nations increasingly seek partnerships abroad, drawn to cultures perceived as offering greater reciprocity and less adversarial gender dynamics. This outbound movement creates microeconomies in destination countries where foreign income supports local businesses catering to expatriates while introducing new social expectations that sometimes clash with native norms. The exchange reshapes local dating markets, raising standards for some while creating resentment among others who view the influx as disruptive. Back in originating countries, the dual outflow of women seeking affordability and men seeking compatibility contributes to demographic imbalances, with certain age cohorts thinning in urban areas and leaving gaps in labor markets and social services. Governments respond with mixed policies, some encouraging return migration through incentives, while others tighten visa requirements to manage cultural impacts. The phenomenon underscores the interconnectedness of modern economies where domestic gender dynamics spill over borders and influence global flows of people and capital. Remittances from men living abroad rise, supporting families in home countries, but also highlighting the redirection of resources away from domestic partners. Women who relocate face their own challenges, including language barriers, credential recognition issues, and the need to rebuild professional networks from scratch. Success depends on adaptability, language acquisition, and willingness to integrate rather than remain in expatriate enclaves. Those who thrive often credit the lower cost base for allowing savings and investment that proved impossible at home. The trend contributes to a rebalancing of global perceptions, with Western women encountering societies where traditional roles persist and offer practical advantages amid economic pressure. This exposure prompts reflection on the trade offs between cultural freedoms and financial security, leading some to adopt hybrid approaches that blend independence with selective interdependence. Men engaging internationally report higher satisfaction in relationships built on clearer expectations, reinforcing domestic decisions to remain single or highly selective. The cross pollination of ideas accelerates through online communities where experiences shared across continents inform strategies and temper expectations. Over time, these interactions contribute to a more globalized understanding of gender economics, challenging localized narratives and fostering comparative analysis. The movement remains modest in scale, but symbolically potent, illustrating how internal collapses generate external adjustments that further reshape the landscape. The unfolding consequences extend into the realm of mental and emotional health, where the sustained pressure of financial instability intersects with the erosion of social buffers that once provided psychological relief. Women navigating this era often describe a persistent undercurrent of anxiety that stems not solely from monetary shortfalls, but from the realization that previously reliable pathways to security have narrowed or vanished. The absence of a partner willing to absorb unexpected expenses creates a constant background hum of vigilance, where every minor cost becomes a potential tipping point toward deeper hardship. Sleep patterns disrupt as worries about upcoming bills cycle through the night, leading to fatigue that impairs decision making and productivity during the day. Concentration wanes under the weight of survival calculations, turning routine tasks into exhausting mental exercises. Social withdrawal becomes common, not out of preference, but necessity, as discretionary spending on outings or gatherings falls away. leaving individuals increasingly isolated within their own four walls. Friendships that once revolved around shared experiences of dating or mutual support shift toward conversations dominated by practical concerns, straining bonds when one party perceives the other as perpetually in need. The stigma attached to asking for help intensifies this isolation, as admitting struggle carries layers of judgment about personal choices made years earlier. Professional environments feel the strain as well, with reduced energy for networking or advancement translating into stalled careers at precisely the moment when income stability matters most. Performance reviews reflect the toll, sometimes resulting in missed promotions or even job loss, which then feeds back into greater financial pressure and heightened emotional distress. Therapy and counseling services see increased demand, though access remains limited by cost for those already stretched thin, creating a paradox where the very support needed to cope becomes another unaffordable expense. Online forums and support groups proliferate as lower cost alternatives, offering spaces where women exchange strategies for stretching dollars, negotiating with landlords, or identifying overlooked assistance programs. These digital communities provide validation and practical tips, but cannot fully substitute for tangible relief, often amplifying collective frustration when solutions prove temporary or insufficient. The emotional landscape includes moments of anger directed inward and outward, with some processing regret over past dismissals of stability focused advice, while others channel resentment toward the broader system or the men who stepped away. This anger, when unaddressed, risks hardening into bitterness that further alienates potential allies or opportunities. Conversely, those who channel the energy into focused action often report gradual improvements in outlook, as small wins, such as paying off a single debt or securing a side income stream, restore a sense of agency. The contrast between these trajectories highlights the role of mindset in determining outcomes amid identical external pressures. Resilience emerges not as an innate trait, but as a cultivated response built through deliberate habits of tracking expenses, seeking incremental raises, or learning new marketable skills during off hours. Emotional health improves measurably when individuals regain even partial control over their circumstances, underscoring that while the structural challenges remain formidable, personal responses can mitigate the worst effects. Men, observing from their side of the divide, largely maintain emotional equilibrium by design, having structured lives around predictability and low relational overhead. Their days follow routines that minimize surprises, with clear boundaries protecting time and resources from encroachment. This predictability fosters a baseline contentment that stands in relief against the turbulence many women experience. The divergence in emotional states reinforces the separation, as few men express willingness to re enter dynamics perceived as high risk for disruption. The broader cultural conversation around mental health begins incorporating these gender specific pressures, with articles and podcasts exploring how economic shifts influence psychological well being differently across demographics. Public awareness grows that financial stress manifests uniquely depending on access to traditional support mechanisms, prompting calls for targeted interventions that address root causes rather than symptoms alone. Workplace wellness programs expand to include financial planning workshops alongside traditional stress management, recognizing the inseparability of money worries from overall health. Employers in female dominated fields face pressure to offer more flexible arrangements or cost of living adjustments, though competitive markets limit how far such changes extend. The cumulative impact on population health metrics appears in rising rates of stress related conditions among working age women, from hypertension to digestive issues linked to chronic worry. Healthcare providers note the trend, adjusting treatment plans to include financial counseling referrals where appropriate. Over the longer horizon, these health effects carry downstream consequences, potentially shortening life expectancies in affected cohorts or increasing reliance on public medical systems already strained. The situation demands proactive measures at both individual and societal levels to prevent a full scale public health challenge from developing. Prevention hinges on early financial education, robust safety nets for transitional periods, and cultural narratives that value preparation without shaming those caught unprepared. The winter continues because prevention lagged behind prediction, but the season also contains the seeds of renewal for those willing to plant them through disciplined effort and honest reflection. Shifting perspective to the corporate and entrepreneurial responses, businesses increasingly recognize the emerging market of financially constrained single women as a distinct consumer segment with unique needs and limitations. Companies that once targeted aspirational lifestyles now pivot toward value driven offerings that emphasize durability, multi purpose utility, and cost transparency. Apparel brands introduce capsule wardrobes built around versatile pieces that maximize utility while minimizing upkeep expenses, appealing to those who can no longer afford frequent wardrobe refreshes. Beauty product lines launch budget conscious ranges that deliver essential results without premium pricing, acknowledging that discretionary spending on appearance persists but within tighter constraints. Food companies develop single serve meal solutions that balance nutrition, convenience, and price, catering to households without shared cooking economies. Housing providers experiment with micro apartments and co living models that reduce per person costs through shared amenities while preserving privacy, attracting those priced out of traditional rentals. Real estate investment trusts focus on affordable urban infill projects designed for solo occupants, anticipating sustained demand from this demographic. Financial services firms roll out specialized products such as microloans for emergency expenses, no fee checking accounts with built in budgeting tools, and credit building programs tailored to irregular income patterns common in gig work. Investment platforms promote low minimum fractional shares and automated savings roundups, lowering barriers for those starting from small amounts. These corporate adaptations reflect a pragmatic acknowledgement that the old consumer model based on dual income disposable spending has contracted, necessitating new approaches that serve thinner wallets without sacrificing perceived quality. Entrepreneurs within the affected demographic launch ventures addressing pain points directly, from apps that aggregate discounts on essentials to services matching roommates with compatible financial habits. Success in these niches often stems from authentic understanding of the target audience, allowing founders to build loyalty through genuine problem solving rather than aggressive marketing. The entrepreneurial ecosystem thus becomes both a symptom of the crisis and a partial remedy, creating employment opportunities while filling market gaps left by larger players. Venture capital flows cautiously into these areas, favoring models with clear paths to profitability over speculative growth. The result is a more grounded startup landscape in certain sectors, prioritizing sustainability over rapid scaling. Corporate human resources departments adjust policies to retain talent facing financial strain, offering emergency hardship funds, advanced pay options, or partnerships with financial wellness providers. These measures help stabilize workforces in industries hit hardest by automation and cost pressures. The overall economic adjustment proceeds through thousands of small pivots rather than sweeping overhauls, gradually aligning supply with the new demand reality shaped by widespread solo living and constrained budgets. This alignment benefits consumers by increasing options suited to their circumstances while pressuring businesses to operate efficiently and innovate continuously. The process illustrates how market forces respond to demographic and behavioral shifts, even when those shifts originate in cultural and relational changes rather than purely economic ones. Over time, the adaptations stabilize segments of the economy, creating pockets of resilience amid broader uncertainty. Businesses that fail to adjust risk losing relevance, while those that anticipate and meet the needs of the changing consumer base position themselves for sustained growth in the new environment. Exploring the intersection with technological development, the acceleration of artificial intelligence and automation continues to exert differential pressure across gender lines, intensifying the financial squeeze in ways that compound existing vulnerabilities. Fields historically employing large numbers of women, including data entry, customer service, basic accounting, and routine administrative support, face rapid obsolescence as software handles tasks with greater speed and lower cost. The displacement occurs not through malice, but through efficiency gains that organizations adopt to remain competitive in tight margin environments. Workers in these roles often lack immediate transferable skills to higher value positions, creating extended periods of unemployment or underemployment that deplete savings and increase reliance on public support. Retraining programs exist, but frequently suffer from low completion rates due to time conflicts with existing jobs or family responsibilities, leaving many in limbo. Meanwhile, male dominated sectors such as engineering, software development, and skilled trades experience slower displacement or even growth as technology creates demand for oversight, maintenance, and creative application of new tools. This asymmetry widens the earnings gap in practice, even as nominal wage equality improves in some areas. Women attempting to enter more resilient fields encounter barriers, including educational prerequisites, networking challenges, and workplace cultures that remain male skewed despite diversity initiatives. Online learning platforms offer accessible entry points, yet completion and application of knowledge vary widely depending on self discipline and external support. The technological tide lifts some boats while leaving others grounded, with outcomes tied closely to adaptability and access to upskilling resources. Those who successfully pivot often report renewed confidence and financial breathing room, demonstrating that while the transition proves arduous, it remains possible for the determined. The pace of change demands lifelong learning as a baseline expectation rather than an optional enhancement, a cultural shift that challenges generations raised with the idea of a single career path. Educational institutions respond by shortening credential timelines, modularizing courses, and partnering with employers to align curricula with emerging needs. Governments experiment with subsidies for retraining in high demand areas, though bureaucratic hurdles limit reach. The interplay between technology and gender economics thus becomes a central driver of the prolonged winter, forcing continuous adaptation while punishing stagnation. Those who embrace the necessity of perpetual skill, renewal position themselves to weather future disruptions, while those who resist face compounding disadvantage. The lesson repeats across contexts. Preparation and flexibility determine survival in an accelerating landscape. The intersection of technology and gender economics reveals yet another layer of acceleration in this unfolding transformation. As emerging tools and platforms begin to reshape how individuals manage scarcity, seek opportunity, and maintain visibility in a world that increasingly rewards digital presence over physical proximity. Content creation emerges as one of the few avenues where women can attempt to generate income with relatively low barriers to entry. Yet the reality quickly proves far more competitive and unforgiving than promotional narratives suggest. Algorithms favor consistency, niche specialization, and audience retention metrics that demand near constant output, turning what begins as a side pursuit into a full time obligation with unpredictable returns. Many who enter this space discover that building a sustainable following requires not just talent or charisma, but strategic understanding of trends, engagement psychology, and platform specific optimization that takes months or years to master. Those who succeed often do so by niching down into highly specific topics where competition remains thin, delivering value that feels indispensable a dedicated but limited audience. The financial payoff, when it arrives, tends to concentrate among a small percentage, while the majority earn supplemental amounts that barely offset equipment, editing software subscriptions, or advertising costs needed to gain initial traction. This winner take most dynamic mirrors broader economic patterns where technological leverage amplifies disparities rather than equalizing them. Women attempting to monetize personal brands face additional scrutiny around appearance and authenticity, with audience expectations sometimes pressuring them to maintain polished aesthetics that consume time and money already in short supply. The irony lies in how the very pursuit of visibility to escape financial pressure reinforces the beauty maintenance cycle that contributed to earlier strain. Meanwhile, men who engage in similar digital ventures frequently gravitate toward technical, gaming, finance, or commentary niches that place less emphasis on physical presentation and more on knowledge delivery or entertainment value, allowing them to scale with lower overhead. This divergence in content strategy further widens the gap in earning potential within the creator economy, as niches with higher advertiser interest command premium rates. The platform dependency inherent in this model introduces another vulnerability. Changes in payout structures, demonetization policies, or algorithm shifts can erase months of progress overnight, leaving creators scrambling to adapt or diversify. Many respond by building email lists, membership communities, or product lines that provide more direct control over revenue, though these transitions require upfront investment and audience trust that takes time to earn. The creator landscape thus becomes both a lifeline and a precarious tightrope, offering hope to some while exposing others to the same structural inequalities that define the broader economy. Beyond content creation, artificial intelligence tools themselves become double edged instruments in this environment. On one hand, they lower barriers to productivity by automating writing, editing, graphic design, and even basic video production tasks that previously demanded expensive software or hired help. A woman with limited resources can now produce professional looking material using free or low cost AI assistants, potentially leveling the playing field in certain creative domains. On the other hand, the same technology floods markets with generated content, increasing supply to the point where human created work struggles to stand out unless it offers unmistakable originality or emotional depth that current models cannot fully replicate. The net effect for many remains neutral at best, as efficiency gains get competed away almost immediately through oversaturation. Those who master prompt engineering and workflow integration gain temporary advantages, but the window closes quickly as tools become more accessible and users more skilled. The technological arms race rewards rapid adaptation, punishing those who hesitate or lack the time to experiment due to survival demands. This dynamic favors individuals with existing financial cushions or flexible schedules, further entrenching advantages for those already positioned ahead. Education platforms attempt to bridge the gap by offering AI literacy courses, yet enrollment often correlates with prior resources rather than need, meaning the most vulnerable benefit least from the very training designed to help them. The result is a bifurcated response to technological change: acceleration for the I, prepared, and marginalization for the rest. The winter deepens, not because technology inherently disadvantages one group, but because its deployment occurs within an already uneven landscape where access to learning, experimentation time, and risk tolerance varies dramatically. Moving into the domain of legal and policy frameworks, the sustained financial pressure on single women begins to generate measurable shifts in how laws and regulations evolve to address emerging vulnerabilities without directly confronting their relational origins. Family law courts notice rising caseloads involving disputes over shared assets in short term cohabitations that dissolve under economic strain, prompting some jurisdictions to clarify property division rules for non marital partnerships of certain durations. These changes aim to reduce litigation by setting clearer expectations up front, though they also discourage casual cohabitation among those wary of unintended legal entanglements. Estate planning attorneys report increased demand for wills and trusts among never married women in their 30s and 40s who recognize the absence of default spousal inheritance protections and seek to direct assets toward chosen beneficiaries such as siblings, friends, or charitable causes. This trend reflects a broader cultural acknowledgement that traditional family structures no longer serve as the primary safety net for most adults. Consumer protection agencies strengthen enforcement around predatory lending practices targeting cash strapped individuals, particularly payday loans and high interest installment plans that disproportionately ensnare those living paycheck to paycheck. Regulators expand requirements for transparent fee disclosure and cooling off periods, though critics argue these measures address symptoms rather than the underlying income insufficiency driving reliance on such products. Housing policy sees incremental movement toward rent stabilization expansions in high cost cities, with some municipalities introducing vouchers specifically for single adults facing displacement risks. These programs often face wait lists far longer than available units, limiting impact, yet they signal growing recognition that solo households require distinct support mechanisms. Tax code debates heat up around proposals to adjust filing statuses and deductions to reduce the marriage penalty that inadvertently penalizes single earners, though political gridlock slows progress. Social Security reform discussions increasingly include provisions for lifetime earners who never married or cohabited long term, acknowledging that current benefit calculations assume spousal or survivor supplements that many will never receive. These conversations remain preliminary, but indicate that demographic realities are beginning to force structural rethinking. Workplace legislation sees pushes for mandatory emergency savings accounts funded through payroll deductions, similar to retirement plans, but accessible for short term hardships. Proponents argue that such mechanisms would provide a buffer against sudden income loss or unexpected expenses, reducing dependence on credit. Opponents raise concerns about reduced take home pay for already strained budgets, highlighting the tension between paternalistic protection and immediate financial relief. The policy environment evolves slowly, shaped by competing interests and limited fiscal room, yet the cumulative direction points toward greater institutional acknowledgement of solo living as a permanent rather than transitional state. Governments experiment with pilot programs offering financial coaching bundled with public assistance eligibility, aiming to transition recipients towards self sufficiency rather than perpetual reliance. Outcomes vary by implementation quality and participant engagement, with successful cases demonstrating that structured guidance combined with modest incentives can yield measurable improvements in budgeting discipline and debt reduction. These efforts remain small scale, but provide data points for potential wider adoption. The overall legislative response lags behind the pace of change on the ground, reflecting the difficulty of crafting neutral policies that address gender specific outcomes without appearing to favor one group. The winter persists in part because policy moves at bureaucratic speed, while economic and cultural shifts accelerate, leaving many to bridge the gap through personal ingenuity or community level solutions. Delving into community level adaptations uncovers a patchwork of grassroots responses that emerge organically to fill voids left by retreating formal structures and reluctant institutions. Neighborhood mutual aid networks expand beyond traditional disaster relief to include ongoing support for members facing chronic financial strain, with groups organizing bulk food purchases, tool libraries, clothing swaps, and skill sharing workshops that reduce individual costs through collective action. These initiatives succeed most when grounded in pre existing trust rather than broad outreach, as participants value reciprocity and accountability over anonymous charity. Online local groups coordinate ride shares for job interviews, childcare exchanges, and emergency housing for those facing eviction, creating informal safety nets that prove more responsive than government programs in many cases. Religious congregations increasingly incorporate financial discipleship programs alongside spiritual guidance, teaching debt elimination strategies, budgeting principles, and entrepreneurship basics framed within ethical contexts. These efforts attract participants seeking both practical help and moral support, fostering environments where vulnerability can be expressed without shame. Secular community centers pivot toward adult education series focused on career transitions, resume building, and interview preparation, tailored to mid career women re entering or pivoting fields. Attendance rises as word spreads through social networks, with many reporting tangible outcomes such as new certifications or job offers that provide incremental stability. Informal lending circles, rooted in cultural traditions from various immigrant communities, gain renewed relevance among native born participants who learn of them through multicultural neighborhoods. These rotating savings and credit associations offer interest free loans based on group trust, enabling members to cover large one time expenses or invest in small business starts without predatory terms. Success depends heavily on group cohesion and clear rules, with failures often traced to breakdowns in accountability. The proliferation of these micro solutions illustrates human capacity for self organization when larger systems prove inadequate, though scalability remains limited by volunteer energy and coordination challenges. Digital platforms facilitate wider reach, with apps connecting people for shared housing, expense splitting, or collaborative purchasing, reducing isolation while lowering costs. These tools work best when moderated to prevent exploitation, with successful communities establishing norms around communication and conflict resolution. The grassroots layer adds resilience to the broader picture, demonstrating that while macro forces drive the crisis, micro responses can soften its impact for those actively engaged. The winter feels less severe in pockets where such networks thrive, offering proof that collective ingenuity can complement individual discipline in navigating scarcity. The financial pressures now begin to reshape educational trajectories in ways that will echo through future labor markets and innovation cycles for decades to come. Younger women entering college or vocational training today face a starkly different calculus than their predecessors did just 10 or 15 years ago. The promise of a degree leading automatically to financial security has eroded under the weight of student debt burdens that outpace starting salaries in many fields, combined with the knowledge that relational subsidies once helped offset living costs during and immediately after graduation. This awareness drives a pragmatic pivot toward programs perceived as offering quicker returns on investment and lower risk of prolonged unemployment. Enrollment in 4 year liberal arts degrees declines relative to targeted associate programs, certifications, and trade apprenticeships that promise employability within 2 years or less. Fields such as nursing, medical assisting, early childhood education, and certain information technology specializations maintain steady or growing interest because they combine relatively short training periods with clear pathways to stable, if not spectacular, paychecks. Meanwhile, enrollment in disciplines once popular for their perceived prestige or flexibility, such as general business administration, communications, or social sciences, stagnates or drops as students weigh the cost benefit ratio more ruthlessly. Advisors increasingly emphasize stackable credentials that allow incremental progress toward employability without requiring full multi year commitments up front. Online and hybrid learning formats gain dominance among those already working, enabling skill acquisition without sacrificing current income, though completion rates remain lower than in person programs due to competing demands on time and attention. The shift reflects a broader cultural move away from education as a consumption good or status marker toward education as a calculated investment with measurable payback periods. Parents play a more active role in steering choices, often insisting on programs with documented placement rates and median salary outcomes rather than allowing pursuit of passions without financial grounding. This parental involvement sometimes creates tension when it clashes with personal interests, yet economic necessity frequently prevails. The result is a graduating cohort more technically skilled and vocationally focused, but potentially narrower in intellectual breadth, a trade off that may influence creative and critical thinking capacities in the workforce over time. Universities respond by accelerating curriculum redesign, shortening degree timelines, embedding work experience requirements, and partnering directly with employers to guarantee interview slots or apprenticeships upon completion. Those institutions slow to adapt face declining applications and financial strain, accelerating closures or mergers among smaller private colleges. Community colleges, long overshadowed by 4 year universities, experience a renaissance as affordable entry points that feed into high demand career tracks. The educational realignment thus becomes another mechanism through which the winter enforces discipline, channeling human capital toward areas of proven economic utility rather than speculative or deferred value pursuits. This channeling carries long term societal implications, potentially reducing cultural output in fields reliant on broad liberal education while strengthening technical and service sector capacity. The process unfolds unevenly, with socioeconomic background heavily determining access to the most advantageous paths. Those from families with existing financial literacy or networks navigate the new landscape more successfully, securing scholarships, internships, and mentorships that compound advantages. Those without such support often default to whatever programs offer immediate aid packages or flexible scheduling, sometimes locking themselves into lower ceiling trajectories before they fully understand the implications. The generational handoff thus perpetuates certain inequalities even as it dismantles others rooted in outdated assumptions about automatic mobility through credentials alone. Turning to the transformation in consumer behavior patterns, the contraction of disposable income forces a wholesale reevaluation of what constitutes essential versus optional spending, leading to habits that may persist even if conditions eventually improve. Bulk purchasing cooperatives form in apartment complexes and online neighborhood groups, allowing members to split large quantity items such as rice, cleaning supplies, toiletries, and non perishable foods at warehouse prices that individual budgets cannot reach. These cooperatives operate on simple trust systems or small membership fees that fund shared storage space, demonstrating how scarcity breeds cooperation at the hyper local level. Secondhand markets explode in popularity, with platforms specializing in clothing, furniture, electronics, and household goods seeing record transaction volumes as people opt for gently used items over new purchases. The cultural stigma, once attached to buying pre owned, diminishes rapidly, replaced by pride in smart resource management and environmental consciousness. Thrift stores and consignment shops upgrade their merchandising and online presence to capture this growing demand, turning what was once a niche into a mainstream retail channel. Subscription services face scrutiny, with many users canceling all but the most indispensable ones and rotating through free trials to maintain access without long term commitment. Streaming, meal delivery, and beauty boxes suffer steep churn rates as households prioritize bare minimum entertainment and grooming. Home cooked meals from scratch become the default rather than the exception, with recipe sharing communities flourishing around budget conscious ingredient lists and batch preparation techniques that maximize output per dollar spent. Gardening revives in urban settings through balcony pots, community plots, and windowsill herbs, providing small but meaningful reductions in produce costs while offering psychological benefits through tangible self reliance. Energy conservation practices intensify, from strategic appliance usage to DIY insulation improvements and cold weather layering instead of thermostat increases. These micro adjustments accumulate into significant annual savings, though they demand constant attention and discipline that can feel exhausting over extended periods. The behavioral shift extends to transportation, with walking, cycling, and public transit replacing personal vehicle ownership for many in dense areas, while car sharing services gain traction among those who need occasional access without full time costs. The decline in new car purchases among this demographic pressures manufacturers to offer more affordable models with basic features rather than luxury add ons, reshaping automotive design priorities. Overall, consumption moves from status oriented to utility oriented, with quality judged by durability and cost per use rather than brand prestige or novelty. Brands that adapt by emphasizing longevity, repairability, and transparent pricing retain loyalty, while those clinging to aspirational marketing lose ground. The long term effect is an economy less driven by discretionary spending and more anchored in necessities, a change that moderates boom bust cycles but also slows growth in consumer driven sectors. This moderation may ultimately prove stabilizing, though it arrives through widespread hardship rather than deliberate policy. Investigating the evolving dynamics within professional environments uncovers how workplaces become arenas where the financial strain manifests in subtle but pervasive ways that influence culture, productivity, and retention. Women in corporate settings report higher levels of presenteeism, attending work despite illness or burnout because sick days translate directly into lost wages that cannot be absorbed. This attendance under duress reduces overall effectiveness and increases error rates, creating a feedback loop where performance suffers and advancement opportunities diminish. Managers notice the pattern, but often lack tools or authority to address root causes tied to personal finances outside the office. Performance improvement plans sometimes follow, exacerbating stress rather than resolving it. Turnover rises in roles with rigid schedules or limited flexibility. As employees seek positions offering remote options, variable hours, or better pay to offset living costs. Companies that maintain outdated expectations around FaceTime and after hours availability lose talent to more accommodating competitors, particularly in tight labor markets. Human resources departments expand employee assistance programs to include financial counseling, debt management referrals, and emergency loan access, though utilization remains inconsistent due to privacy concerns or skepticism about effectiveness. Some organizations introduce tiered pay adjustments linked to local cost of living indices, attempting to keep compensation competitive in high expense regions. These adjustments help retention but strain budgets in other areas, prompting efficiency drives that sometimes result in headcount reductions elsewhere. Team dynamics shift as financial pressures reduce participation in optional social events or group lunches, diminishing informal bonding that once facilitated collaboration and knowledge sharing. Remote work, already normalized, becomes entrenched among those who benefit from eliminated commuting costs and flexible meal preparation, though isolation risks grow for those whose home environments offer little separation between professional and personal life. Promotion criteria evolve informally toward measurable output over visibility or relationship capital, benefiting those who deliver results quietly while disadvantaging those whose strengths lie in networking or office presence. The workplace thus mirrors the broader society in rewarding self sufficiency and penalizing dependency, even when that dependency stems from structural realities rather than personal shortcomings. Over time, these incremental changes accumulate into a professional culture that values resilience, adaptability, and independence above loyalty or tenure, reshaping expectations for entire careers. The ongoing transformation reaches into the sphere of healthcare access and outcomes, where the financial squeeze begins to alter how individuals interact with medical systems, preventive practices, and long term wellness planning in ways that compound over years. Women facing persistent budget constraints frequently delay routine checkups, dental cleanings, vision exams, and specialist consultations because even modest copays or transportation costs represent choices between current health maintenance and immediate survival needs such as rent or groceries. This deferral pattern leads to situations where preventable conditions progress to stages requiring more expensive emergency interventions, creating a cycle of higher overall costs and poorer health trajectories. Prescription adherence suffers as well, with some rationing medications by skipping doses or splitting pills to stretch supplies, a practice that undermines treatment efficacy and risks complications, particularly in chronic conditions like hypertension, diabetes, or thyroid disorders. Over the counter alternatives become the default for minor ailments, even when they offer inferior relief compared to prescribed options, further eroding quality of life during already stressful periods. Mental health services, despite growing awareness of their importance, remain largely out of reach for those without employer sponsored coverage or sufficient disposable income, leaving many to manage anxiety, depression, or adjustment disorders through self directed methods that range from free online resources to peer support groups with varying degrees of effectiveness. Telehealth options expand access in theory, yet practical barriers such as reliable internet, quiet private space, and device capability limit uptake among the most financially pressed. Public health clinics and community health centers experience increased patient loads, stretching already thin resources and lengthening wait times that discourage follow through. Preventive behaviors shift toward low cost or no cost interventions, with walking replacing gym memberships, home stretching routines substituting for physical therapy sessions, and dietary adjustments focusing on inexpensive, nutrient dense foods like beans, eggs, oats, and seasonal produce rather than specialized supplements or meal plans. These adaptations yield mixed results. Some individuals maintain baseline health through disciplined consistency, while others see gradual declines from accumulated neglect of subtler issues. Insurance marketplaces see higher enrollment in high deductible plans paired with health savings accounts, as lower premiums free up monthly cash flow even if catastrophic coverage feels distant. Those who qualify for subsidies navigate complex enrollment periods carefully, though administrative hurdles and documentation requirements lead to gaps in coverage that exacerbate vulnerability during illness. Long term care planning, once dismissed as a distant concern, gains urgency among women in their 40s and 50s who recognize that solo living means no automatic spousal support during potential disability or frailty in later years. Discussions around long term care insurance increase, though premiums remain prohibitive for many, prompting reliance on Medicaid planning strategies or family conversations about future living arrangements that carry emotional weight. The cumulative health impact appears in population level data, showing widening disparities in life expectancy and disability adjusted life years between single women with limited resources and those with more secure financial footing or relational buffers. Hospitals report higher admission rates for conditions linked to deferred care, placing additional strain on emergency departments already operating near capacity. Policy advocates push for expanded community health worker programs that provide in home support, medication management assistance, and navigation services at low or no cost, with pilot results indicating reduced hospital readmissions and improved adherence when implemented well. These programs demonstrate that targeted, relationship based interventions can mitigate some of the damage caused by financial barriers, though funding limitations restrict scale. The healthcare landscape thus becomes another domain where the winter enforces harsh trade offs, demanding prioritization of immediate survival over future well being and highlighting the interdependence between economic stability and physical vitality. Examining the impact on entrepreneurship and small business ownership uncovers a dual narrative of constraint and unexpected opportunity as individuals seek alternative paths to income in an environment where traditional employment offers less security. Women launching microenterprises often begin with ventures requiring minimal capital, such as home based baking, handmade crafts sold through online marketplaces, virtual assisting services, or freelance writing and editing. These businesses typically start as necessities rather than passions, driven by the need to supplement wages or replace lost income entirely. Success hinges on rapid learning curves around digital marketing, customer service, pricing strategy, and cash flow management, skills that many acquire through free online tutorials and trial and error experience. Platforms that facilitate direct sales reduce overhead compared to physical storefronts, though fees, advertising costs, and competition keep profit margins thin. Those who scale successfully frequently do so by identifying underserved niches where personal experience provides authentic insight, such as budget conscious meal planning content, affordable fashion styling for professional settings, or support services tailored to other women navigating similar financial challenges. The emotional reward of self determination offsets some of the stress, with many reporting greater satisfaction from controlling their schedules and income potential despite the uncertainty. Failures occur frequently, often due to underestimating time demands, unexpected expenses, or market saturation, yet each attempt builds knowledge that improves odds in subsequent efforts. Access to microloans, grants targeted toward women owned businesses, and incubators focused on underrepresented founders provides critical lifelines, though application processes and eligibility criteria exclude some of the most vulnerable. Networking events shift toward virtual formats to eliminate travel and attire costs, allowing broader participation while maintaining professional connections essential for referrals and collaborations. The rise in solo entrepreneurship contributes to a more fragmented but resilient economic fabric, where small, agile operations fill gaps left by larger corporations, reducing headcount or automating functions. This fragmentation diversifies risk across thousands of independent entities rather than concentrating it in fewer large employers, potentially buffering communities against widespread layoffs during downturns. Tax preparation becomes more complex for these business owners, requiring diligent record keeping for deductions related to home office space, equipment, supplies, and marketing expenses. Many turn to affordable accounting software or community tax clinics to navigate filings accurately and maximize legitimate write offs. The entrepreneurial surge thus represents both adaptation to necessity and a quiet redefinition of economic participation, where value creation occurs at smaller scales but with greater personal agency. The cultural production sphere feels the strain as well, with arts, literature, music, and entertainment shifting to reflect themes of resilience, solitude, pragmatism, and reevaluation, rather than aspiration or romance in the traditional sense. Independent creators working on shoestring budgets produce works that prioritize authenticity and relatability over polish, often distributed through free or low cost platforms to reach audiences facing parallel realities. Literature sees an increase in memoirs and essay collections exploring the emotional terrain of unexpected independence, financial reckoning, and the search for meaning outside conventional milestones. These narratives resonate deeply with readers who find validation in shared struggles and practical insights woven into personal stories. Visual arts move toward mediums that require little investment, such as digital illustration, recycled material sculpture, or photography captured with existing smartphones, yielding bodies of work that comment on consumption, impermanence, and adaptation. Music production democratizes further through accessible software and home recording setups, leading to genres that blend introspection with subtle defiance against earlier cultural expectations. Film and video content gravitates toward short form documentaries and personal vlogs that document real time navigation of scarcity, offering both catharsis for creators and utility for viewers seeking strategies or solidarity. Mainstream media adapts by incorporating these grassroots voices, though often through a lens that softens edges or frames experiences as temporary rather than structural. Theater and live performance contract in scale but intensify in intimacy, with small venues hosting works that examine isolation, resourcefulness, and the quiet dignity found in self reliance. The cultural output collectively moves away from the narratives celebrating excess or effortless success toward ones that honor endurance, ingenuity, and the value of small, deliberate choices. This shift influences younger audiences by normalizing stories where achievement arrives through persistence rather than privilege, potentially reshaping ambitions and definitions of fulfillment over time. Funding for arts projects increasingly relies on crowdfunding, patronage models, and community subscriptions, creating direct relationships between creators and supporters that bypass traditional gatekeepers. The result is a more decentralized cultural ecosystem that mirrors the economic one, with influence distributed across many small nodes rather than concentrated in a few large institutions. The transformation continues to influence intergenerational dynamics within families, where the financial realities confronting many single women in their prime working years begin to alter expectations, resource flows, and emotional bonds across age groups in ways that reshape household structures for the long term. Grandparents who once anticipated providing occasional support to adult children now find themselves in the reverse position, sometimes receiving modest assistance from daughters who prioritize parental needs over discretionary spending, or conversely, witnessing those same daughters delay visits or limit contributions because every dollar must cover immediate essentials. Siblings coordinate more deliberately around shared caregiving responsibilities for aging parents, establishing rotating schedules, pooled funds for medical expenses, or joint decisions about long term care facilities to distribute burdens that might otherwise fall disproportionately on one person. Conversations about inheritance shift from assumptions of equitable division to explicit discussions about liquidity needs, with some families choosing to convert assets into cash earlier or designate specific bequests that address acute vulnerabilities rather than waiting for probate processes that could take years. Younger relatives, observing the struggles of aunts, mothers, or older cousins, internalize lessons about financial independence at earlier ages, prompting them to seek part time work during high school, pursue scholarships aggressively, or choose career tracks with faster entry and reliable pay rather than extended education with uncertain outcomes. This early awareness creates a feedback loop where caution becomes generational wisdom, passed down through practical advice rather than abstract ideals. The emotional texture of family life changes as well, with pride in individual accomplishment sometimes tempered by concern over visible hardship, leading to more frequent check ins framed around practical help rather than casual socializing. Holidays and gatherings contract in scale, favoring low cost home based events over travel or restaurant outings. Yet the reduced extravagance often fosters deeper connection through shared effort and resourcefulness rather than purchased experiences. The absence of assumed spousal buffers forces families to confront interdependence in new forms, where support flows horizontally among siblings or vertically across generations rather than primarily through romantic partnerships. These adaptations strengthen certain relational muscles while testing others, creating family units that are more resilient to individual setbacks, but also more deliberate in their interactions. Over decades, this recalibration may normalize multi generational living arrangements as a strategic choice rather than a fallback, with households designed to accommodate multiple adults, contributing to shared cost and mutual care. The winter thus imprints itself not only on personal finances, but on the architecture of kinship itself, embedding lessons of mutual reliance into the fabric of lineage. The broader economic indicators begin to reflect the cumulative weight of these individual and household level adjustments, showing up in metrics that economists and policymakers can no longer overlook. Consumer spending growth slows in categories tied to discretionary leisure, travel, and luxury goods, while holding steadier in essentials such as groceries, utilities, and basic apparel, a pattern consistent with widespread belt tightening among a large segment of the adult population. Savings rates among single women in certain age brackets rise modestly as precautionary balances become non negotiable, though the increase often comes at the expense of retirement contributions or investment in higher risk, higher return assets. Credit utilization ratios climb in some cohorts as revolving debt fills gaps between income and unavoidable expenses, prompting credit bureaus to note higher delinquency risks in specific demographic slices, even as overall default rates remain manageable. Labor force participation stabilizes at lower levels for women in mid career stages, with many opting for part time roles, gig combinations, or self employment that offer scheduling control at the cost of benefits and wage predictability. Productivity statistics show mixed signals. Output per worker holds in knowledge based fields, but dips in service sectors where fatigue from second jobs or financial worry reduces focus and increases turnover. Corporate earnings reports in consumer facing industries increasingly cite softer demand from single adult households as a headwind, leading analysts to adjust growth forecasts downward for segments reliant on dual income spending power. Central banks monitor these trends when setting monetary policy, recognizing that persistent financial stress among a sizable portion of the population can dampen inflationary pressures through reduced velocity of money while simultaneously complicating efforts to stimulate broad based recovery. Fiscal authorities face mounting pressure to expand safety net programs tailored to non traditional household configurations, though budget constraints and political polarization limit the scope and speed of such expansions. The macroeconomic picture thus becomes one of subdued but stable adjustment where aggregate demand grows more slowly. Inequality measures show slight widening along gender and marital status lines, and structural shifts in consumption and labor supply become embedded features rather than temporary anomalies. These indicators confirm that the changes underway transcend cyclical fluctuations and represent a durable realignment driven by demographic behavior and cultural evolution. In the final analysis, the winter that arrived carries within it the potential for a different kind of spring, one that emerges not through reversal of the underlying dynamics, but through mastery of the new terrain. Women who navigate this season successfully tend to share certain practices: meticulous tracking of every inflow and outflow, ruthless elimination of recurring charges that deliver minimal value, proactive pursuit of incremental income increases, whether through raises, side ventures, or geographic relocation to lower cost areas, and cultivation of networks built on reciprocity rather than extraction. These habits, once foreign to many, raised in eras of relative abundance, become second nature over time, yielding compounding benefits in the form of reduced anxiety, growing asset bases, and restored sense of control. The path demands trade offs and fewer vacations, simpler wardrobes, delayed purchases, smaller living spaces, but delivers in return a form of sovereignty that no external subsidy can match. Men, having chosen their own course earlier, continue to model the advantages of deliberate minimalism and focused accumulation, serving as living proof that peace and prosperity can coexist with solitude when priorities align accordingly. Society at large slowly absorbs the lesson that relationships function best as enhancements rather than necessities. That provision must flow from mutual value rather than obligation, and that resilience arises from preparation rather than rescue. The great humiliation foretold years ago unfolds not as spectacle, but as quiet, persistent consequence, a long descent that forces confrontation with choices made and paths not taken. Yet within that descent lies opportunity for reinvention, for building lives on foundations of earned security rather than borrowed comfort. The era of entitlement sustained by unacknowledged subsidies gives way to one of accountability sustained by personal discipline and strategic cooperation. Future generations inherit a world where assumptions about automatic support have been stripped away, leaving clearer expectations and more honest negotiations between individuals. The cost of this clarity proves steep for those caught unprepared, but the reward for adaptation is a form of freedom that endures beyond economic cycles or cultural fashions. Winter has arrived and it remains cold outside, yet those who learn its lessons emerge equipped for whatever seasons follow. To the 1 hour gang who stayed until the very end, thank you for your attention and commitment. If you are enjoying these angry guy videos and the direct, no nonsense examination of the realities shaping our world, you can show support by buying me a Red Bull using the link in the description. What did you think about everything discussed here? Do you agree with the trajectory outlined, or do you see different forces at play? Leave a comment below sharing your thoughts, your experiences, or your perspective on where this all leads. Your input matters. Like the video if you like it, do not forget to subscribe. And if you like the video, share the video. And just remember that all roads lead to MWA, men walking away, and cheers.
Nothing says you care like crypto. Nothing can compare. Nothing says you care like crypto. Oh, nothing can compare to crypto.